Welcome back to Master the Marketplace with Caspian. Hi there, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Master the Marketplace. This is Kunal Chopra from Caspian. You know, time and time again, we will introduce on the show a few entrepreneurs who have done some really good stuff as it relates to marketplaces such as Amazon. And today we have an entrepreneur, Mark Lewyn, with us, who's written a book called The $500 Startup on Amazon. And I'd love for him to tell us a little more about the book and the content of the book. But more importantly, let's learn a little bit about Mark first. Mark, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me, Kunal.
Fantastic. So Mark, maybe tell us a little bit about your background, your history, and what got you to write this book on Amazon.
Well, I had looked at a lot of the books that were on the market about Amazon FBA, and a lot of them were very technical in nature, like how to do this, how to do that. And what I wanted to do is write something that was a little more personal in nature, but also share some of the more technical aspects as well. So it's a combination of my personal story and how I got to selling on Amazon FBA, and also, what people can learn from my experience. So that's really what
awesome.
Motivated me. And also, in the early part of my career in the 80s and 90s, I was a journalist. So I was sort of flexing some old writing muscles that I hadn't flexed in quite some time. So, back in the 80s and 90s, I was writing for USA Today and Business Week. And so I wrote about the technology world and all the big happenings in the 80s and 90s. And then when the internet came along, I sort of thought, well, maybe journalism isn't such a great place to be now that the internet's here, and maybe I should explore some other things. And hence, I began my sort of entrepreneurial journey from there.
That's fantastic. And so what led you to entrepreneurship on Amazon? Tell us a little more about that story. How did you get to Amazon specifically?
Well, so let me sort of tell you in sort of a chronological fashion. So after I left journalism in the mid-90s, I joined a company called CitySearch, which was one of the early internet companies. And that was sort of Internet 1.0 when the bubble had occurred. And that did pretty well. And then I kind of went on and really enjoyed that experience and decided I'd try a few other startups. I did an e-government startup, making e-government software. And then I did one where I was taking error pages on the internet and turning them into search results. And I did that for a while, and that did really well. And for that one, and the reason I tell you about that story is we raised a lot of capital to do that. And it went really well for a while until it didn't. And the market changed and kind of ended up crashing and burning, even though we had gotten at one point like a $75 million offer from Barry Diller to buy the company. But my investor wouldn't let me sell. He didn't think it was enough. And I was pretty upset. And from there, it was the slow downward spiral to death, right? And one of the things that it taught me or it didn't teach me, but one of the things I felt afterwards was, gosh, maybe I'd really like to start something where I don't have to spend a ton of money and go raise, many millions of dollars. And I kind of just started researching different business models, really just surfing the net, looking at different models. Like I came across the Amazon FBA model. But before I did, I kind of went through a process that I call it the genius to idiot cycle. And what I mean by the genius to idiot cycle is, everything I think of course, immediately is sheer genius until you realize it was the stupidest thing ever. And I sort of went through this genius to idiot cycle up and down until eventually I landed on the Amazon FBA model. And, for me, it was just nothing more than an experiment to start. I was just like, I don't want to spend a lot of money. I don't want to raise a lot of money. I just want to sort of see how this goes. And the first question I asked myself was, well, what the heck do I sell? I had absolutely no idea what to sell. But over time, I just sort of surfed around and used a lot of the tools that are available today to sort of look at the data. And I kind of came across darts as my first product because the numbers for darts look kind of interesting. And I was like, okay, I'm going to sell darts, even though I've never played the game. I'm honestly not that interested in it either. But I thought the numbers for darts looked very interesting to me. And it didn't seem to have that much competition or not that much. So I was like, okay, let me try this out. And so I read reviews like everybody does and sort of figured out a better Dart product that I could sell. And I came up with this product of a jar of 24 really nice darts in a pretty jar. And I bought them for $5 from China. I sold them for, I don't know, 24, 25 on Amazon. And I was making $10, and pretty quickly I was selling like 50 plus a day. And I thought, wow, this really doesn't suck. I should try this again. And so I kept on, like, it was sort of rinse, wash, and repeat. Let me do another one. And all my products are not really related to each other because they're all kind of data driven things. But the formula, definitely works. And and there was a lot of things I looked at that I didn't do. In fact, like I tell a funny story in the book about how one of the products I didn't do was I didn't sell dildos, even though I looked at the sex toy category and I thought, oh my God, this is amazing. And I did all the research, and I was actually pretty excited by the idea because it looked very profitable. And I, of course, then my mother, in fact, I told my mother about it, who was 85, and she thought it was a brilliant idea. But then I told my wife about it, and she said, I'm not going to have my husband being the king of dildos on Amazon. So I tell the story in the book about, not only the things I did do, but also the things that I elected not to do, and tried to like personalize the Amazon journey a little bit that way.
That's fantastic. Well, what a great story. And so, for budding entrepreneurs that are trying to start off on Amazon, so you're saying, $500 is all that you need. How would you break it down for an entrepreneur? What are the different things that they should be thinking about? How do they spend that $500? Like, walk us through the process in a little more detail.
Well, $500 is what you start with. And along the way, you can kind of make a choice, right? You make a choice of whether you want to reinvest in your business or take on investors or, take on debt and that kind of thing. But if you want to sort of take it slow, one step at a time, you really can grow from a relatively modest amount. You just have to grow from cash flow. And it's really just an issue of how fast do you want to go or not, right? In my case, I really just wanted to grow mostly from cash flow. I took on a few Amazon loans along the way, but mostly it was just a cash flow driven business, and it's grown to almost seven figures at this point. And I kind of wanted the independence of running my own shop. I have three little kids at home, so I kind of wanted something I could run from home, that I could spend time with the kids, and that was pretty much a virtual business. So that was sort of my approach. One of the things I talk about in the book is I tend to be kind of a data-driven kind of guy. So my strategy tends to be more focused on data. So that's why, I chose to sell darts, because the data told me. It's not because I am passionate about darts. Now, other people have a very different approach. They get passionate about what they want to sell or the products they want to sell. It could be, they want to sell the world's greatest salt shaker. That's not me. And actually, I think the odds of success are actually not low, but they are comparatively lower when you sort of, what I call it, the follow your passion approach. I'm more about follow the data as opposed to follow your passion, which doesn't mean the passion approach can't work, because there are plenty of examples of where it can work. It's just, if you want to kind of de-risk yourself, which is what I wanted to do, you might want to like stick hard to the data. And all the mistakes that I made were all times when I just didn't stick to my rule. Like, I started selling darts, and that's been quite a big hit. But then I thought, wow, if they love my darts in a jar product, they're going to love, dart accessories in a jar, right? Well, turns out that just wasn't true, and there was no really data to support that it was true. But I just thought it seemed like logic, so I failed at that. I didn't lose any money because I just sold it for cost, but that was an example where I kind of let my ego get in the way of following the data.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it's the classic product management problem, right? Like, you've got to find your product market fit. which means, you got to have a product, but you got to have the market as well. And so, both have to come together. So that makes sense. And the data can always influence, which market you go after. So that's fantastic. Now, one of the things that, we have seen when we work with manufacturers in China, especially at the Caspian here, is, there are certain minimum order quantities that you have to order before, you can place an order with the manufacturer. Now, with, a smaller budget, is that difficult to do as an entrepreneur when you're starting off? Do you have to meet certain minimums? What does that process look like?
My experience with that in China has been actually very positive. For the most, I mean, a lot of people who I talk to about this, friends and family, they always said, "Oh, well, aren't you afraid of having to order large quantities, or aren't you afraid of working with Chinese suppliers? Are they going to rip you off?" They sort of created the parade of horribles of things that could happen. Turns out that was not my experience at all. A lot of the manufacturers I work with were quite happy to accept lower order quantities, and the trick in making them agree to that is that you got to sort of show that you're in this for the long haul. You want to establish a long-term relationship with them. And so they will often be very flexible with minimum order quantities. So I typically would start out with minimum order quantities of 500 to 1,000 units of whatever I was starting with. And then I'd say to the manufacturer, let's just see how it goes. And if it works, I'm going to order more. If it doesn't work, I'm not. But you've got to be two things. You got to be completely honest and transparent with them. And most importantly, be very respectful of them. Treat them like professionals, just the way you would want to be treated.
Right. And did you go through, or your relationship with Chinese manufacturers, is that just through Alibaba, one of these websites, or did you have more direct relationships?
For the most part, it's been with Alibaba. Interestingly, I've actually never physically talked to any of my manufacturers for the most part. It's all been through email. And actually, that's kind of positive for both sides in a way, in part because, most of the Chinese, in my experience, they're better with the written language than they are with the spoken language. So it's a little easier for them to communicate that way. And that's actually where I've been doing this for over 5 years now, and it's worked out quite nicely that way.
That's awesome. And then what about just quality control? Like, how do you manage that? Do you manage that here in the US when your product comes in, or do you have maybe a brokerage or some other firm that's managing quality control in China for you?
The answer is most of the quality has been really quite good. Now, there have been occasional issues here and there, but for the most part, we haven't had a problem. Now, that may be because we pick products where there's not a lot of room for error. And so they don't have a lot of moving parts and stuff to it where the quality can get screwed up. Typically, as long as you're working with the right suppliers, they have an interest in making sure the quality is good too, because they want your business long term. So if you point out a problem, we found that they rectify that problem pretty quickly because it's in their interest to do so.
Fantastic. That's great. Yeah, it's always good to find a supplier that is in it for the long run, as you mentioned, is here to really earn your business over the long run. I think that's critical, and building that relationship. It's no different than building a relationship with any other brand here in the United States.
That's right. It's interesting. Of all the problems I've had, and I have, let's say, 6 or 7 products, all but one of them are with Chinese suppliers. The one that's in the U.S. is a factory that's located outside of Philadelphia, and that's actually the only one I've had problems with. The Chinese suppliers have all been great, and the U.S. supplier has been more of a challenge, and we may need to shift now our services to China pretty soon as a result of the problems we've been having.
Interesting. And then, Mark, what about the modification of the product? Right? So you find an opportunity in Amazon US, you don't want to just go and manufacture a Me Too product. You want to potentially modify it to a customer demand. Like, how open are our Chinese manufacturers to just redesigning or adopting an existing product to something new? What does that process look like?
For the most part, honestly, we haven't done that many redesigns. Oftentimes for like one of our products, we have a kind of a winning product, and then we'll do variations. of that winning product with different designs, which are just really kind of variations on the theme. It's almost like having different colors of a sweater or something like that. So we've done that. Occasionally we may redesign parts of a product, but it's usually in pretty small ways. Our strategy has always been, we love the nichiest products we can find. We love these really obscure, like actually darts is almost too mainstream for us in some ways because it's a relatively popular game, but so we love like little nichey things that obviously have good sales, but for which, Amazon's not necessarily going to pay a lot of attention to because Amazon's interested in, going after niches or areas that generate, tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of sales. I'm quite happy with things that generate, multiple $100,000 of sales, if not millions of dollars in sales. And, Amazon's just not going to pay attention, or it's not worth it for them to go after it because they're probably making plenty of money from me selling those products.
Right. Now, one of the critiques that I've read online and in different forums, and I've even heard from a few people around new sellers on the Amazon platform, is that, well, it's really difficult to get started right now. It's a competitive marketplace. It's saturated. You've got to be spending a lot on advertisements. What's your take? What's your opinion on a statement like that?
I think I have a couple of opinions. One is I think the market's is always changing and evolving, and you sort of have to accept that as table stakes. It's never a static thing. I think there's plenty of opportunity for people to get in. It's just too big a market, right, for there not to be opportunity. So I would never tell anyone don't start now. In fact, I would encourage them to do it because there's just a tremendous amount of opportunity. The flip side of the coin is the bar is getting higher and higher. Right, so you have to get smarter with your PPC. You got to get smarter with driving outside traffic to your Amazon listing. You got to get smarter about doing a better listing, a higher quality listing. The days of sort of just kind of winging it and hoping you're going to do well they still exist, but they're harder. It's definitely gotten harder. And that's one of the reasons. One of the things you're seeing now in the marketplace is you're seeing a lot of smaller brand owners starting to sell their brands to aggregators like Thrasio. And one of the things we're doing is we're raising a fund of money now to go and start buying these small brands. So it's like what you find is there are a lot of smaller sellers entering the market, growing their brand to maybe $500,000 a year or something, and then selling to the aggregators who have more sophistication than sort of the mom and pop seller does and can really take that brand to the next level. And so in the book, I write about sort of that, the arrival of the aggregator who are basically more sophisticated than, say, the mom and pop seller who's working, out of their basement.
Absolutely. And, they're raising tons of money and they've got access to resources and technology and, everything. So which makes sense completely. They can certainly optimize the mom and pop seller to grow even faster.
That's right. And it doesn't mean the mom and pop seller can't do it themselves. They just have to take the time and effort to really invest in their brand. And what the problem that you find with a lot of mom and pop sellers, and again, we write about this in the book, is that kind of usually it's at the $500,000 level, where they have annual revenues of $500,000, they sort of have to make a choice, right? They either have to dig into their pockets, their cash flow, and invest in advertising and inventory and all sorts of things. They have to go take on debt, which has, pros and cons associated with it, or they have to find an investor to help them fund the business to get to the next level. And a lot of smaller sellers who are running what effectively are lifestyle businesses don't really want to do that. So that makes sort of the aggregators kind of an interesting option because they'll just put a bunch of cash on the table and basically, buy you out.
Right. Makes sense. And then Mark, related to, and we know Amazon US, the bar is higher, no doubt about it, but there's been a lot of international expansion that's been happening on the Amazon front lately. Yesterday I just read an article from Marketplace Pulse that said India is the number 2 in terms of volume marketplace for Amazon. They continue to enter into new countries. They continue to acquire other big players in other smaller countries. What's your view on just international expansion? How should entrepreneurs think about maybe going international first instead of worrying about the US and the competitiveness on the US market?
Well, clearly the international market is growing much faster than the U.S. market. I think there was a report out I saw yesterday where India now is the largest, if not one of the largest markets outside the U.S. now, where it's growing at a faster rate. So, clearly, if you have a product that works in an international market, it makes good sense to go into those markets. I had one product I tried a while ago. It was a glow in the dark stars that go on your kid's bedroom ceiling. And just out of curiosity, we just decided, let's try and go international on that. And we tried it in a bunch of markets. And interestingly enough, the one market where they love these things is Great Britain. And I have no empirical data to tell you why, except I think it just rains a lot in Great Britain, and so they like the idea of seeing these stars on the ceiling of their bedroom or something. So that was my only thought. So I think you always have to be looking at your product set and saying, would this work in Europe or India or wherever? And if you do that, you have to be careful to make sure you translate your listing so that it reflects the local language. Because
right.
if it doesn't, yeah.
Right. But the process is not different, right? From your point of view, which is you still look at the data, you analyze that marketplace, find the gap. Is that the case?
That is the case. It's a little different when you don't live in the market because you don't have, even though you're relying on the data, you have a kind of you don't know the buyers quite as well as you would here in the U.S. That's why, for example, I know a lot of Chinese manufacturers have tried to, run their own Amazon listings here in the U.S. And some of them certainly do well, but a lot of them don't, and that's because they don't necessarily know how to market to the U.S. customer.
Yeah, that's a great point that you make. It's not just, and to the earlier point that I was making as well, it's about product and market fit. It's not just product. And so you've got to be able to find your match for a particular market. And that's, I think, critical. And, some of the Chinese manufacturers trying to create their own listings here. Yeah, that's not worked out too well. So that's a great example. Yeah, that's great. So Mark, any last parting words for entrepreneurs looking to start on Amazon? Of course, we're going to have them read your book. I think it's a great story. I'm going to pick up a copy myself, but anything that you'd like to tell any entrepreneur out there looking to start on Amazon?
Well, I think one of the things I talk a lot about in the $500 startup is that don't let your fears hold you back. What I find, I have a lot of friends and family. I like to think they're really smart, but there's something I call the curse of the overeducated. And by that, what I mean is people who are just so smart that they can talk themselves out of almost anything. And I can tell you that a lot of my friends and family, who I think are very smart people, they can just talk themselves out of anything. And I would tell people, don't talk yourself out of doing this if that's what you want to do. Just go out there and start it. Because, there are 1,000 reasons I could tell you, like, not to do it. That relying on the Amazon platform is very risky. It is. Amazon can pull the plug on you anytime. They can. But I think so. You could come up with logical reasons not to start an Amazon business, but there are 100 reasons as well why you should and why you can potentially do quite well doing it. So I guess one of the pieces of advice I would impart was, don't let your fears overtake you. Just start and see where it goes. And the risk is not necessarily that high.
Fantastic. Well, great parting words here. Again, folks, if you'd like to pick up a copy of the book, The $500 Startup on Amazon by Mark Lewyn, I would highly recommend you picking that up. And I presume, Mark, you'd want everyone to pick this up from Amazon itself?
Well, it's on Barnes and Noble too, and lots of other places, but it makes sense to sell it on Amazon.
There you go. Great. Well, thank you again, Mark, for being on the show. We really appreciate your time, and we look forward to hearing more from you and your company in the future. Till then, everyone, thank you again for joining us on another episode of Master the Marketplace, where we talk about a bunch of things related to marketplaces such as Amazon, Walmart, eBay, etc. Thank you, and see you again very soon.
Thank you.
Through conversations with experts in online retail, with years of marketing, compliance, and inventory management experience, we seek to empower our listeners to master the marketplace. Thanks for listening. We hope to see you next time on Master the Marketplace with Caspian.